For over 3,000 years, a story has lain hidden beneath the sands of Arabia. Where the desert winds now blow, a rich and fertile land once blossomed. At its center, a city of soaring towers. Its most famous ruler, the legendary biblical figure we know as the Queen of Sheba, a woman immortalized in ancient religious records as King Solomon's lover. The truth about this mythical woman and the civilization she once ruled is now emerging from the sands, as archaeologists use the latest technology to reconstruct her most hallowed sanctuary. Described in the ancient holy books of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, in Arabian folklore, as well as the earliest stories of Ethiopia, the Queen of Sheba is a magical figure that appears as if from nowhere. For 30 centuries, her story has been handed down, retold in dozens of languages, until fact and fiction are inseparable. Hollywood's version of the story presented Sheba as a conniving pagan temptress who seduces Solomon in an attempt to bring about Israel's downfall.
It is love I have for her. And out of love, I will attend her ritual.
But just as many archaeologists and scholars accept that King Solomon was a real historical figure, it seems the queen that captured his heart may also have been more than a mere fantasy.
By fantasizing to a certain extent and making it more poetic, an ancient story, an ancient reality is preserved.
To this day, the Queen of Sheba remains one of history's most beguiling enigmas.
She may be the memory of a genuine historical queen. She might be a composite memory of several different female figures who ruled the lands of the sands in ancient times. Scholars can't quite pin her down, and this is probably something that adds to her legendary status.
The search to discover more about this mythical queen and her long-vanished kingdom begins in the desert of southern Yemen, notorious for its banditry. The expedition's patron is Marilyn Phillips Hodgson, whose archaeological team has come to the ruined city of Márib, once the capital of a mighty trading empire. The Arabs called it Saba, the Jews called it Sheba. Close by the city, hidden beneath thousands of tons of desert sand, lie the remains of Márib's greatest shrine, the Mahram Bilqis, the Temple of Sheba. Marilyn's reason for coming here dates back half a century. In 1952, her brother Wendell led a team of American archaeologists to Yemen and took along a camera crew to film the expedition. Bewitched by the legend of Sheba from a young age, Wendell hoped to find evidence that would prove Sheba to be a real character from history. A larger-than-life adventurer who helped inspire the character of Indiana Jones, Wendell set to work excavating the site. He employed 160 Bedouin laborers to help uncover an immense structure undisturbed for more than 1,000 years. Slowly, a grand courtyard emerged, and with it, evidence of a forgotten empire, the Sabaeans. Inscriptions suggested that the temple and the images within it were dedicated to a fertility god, Al-Makka. Since traditional Arabic folklore often associated Sheba with an ancient fertility cult, the findings reinforced the team's belief that evidence for her really might be found here.
What a magnificent area this must have been in the 10th century BC when Her Majesty the Queen of Sheba reigned over this area. The temple of Mahram Bilqis, the richest remaining archaeological treasure house to be excavated anywhere in the Arab world and probably the entire Middle East.
But not everyone was convinced by Wendel's discoveries. Some archaeologists believed the sanctuary only dated back to 400 AD, 14 centuries after the meeting between Solomon and Sheba took place. Undeterred, Wendell pushed on, believing he was on the verge of proving orthodox opinion wrong. Then cruel fate intervened. The hostility of local warlords reached a crescendo.
I was tipped off one day that I was to be assassinated at 3 o'clock the next afternoon. We didn't know what was going to happen. A warrior tribe was racing down the Wadi Harib. The one fact that played in our favor, and I had counted on this, was that they couldn't imagine an American abandoning $1 million in supplies and equipment just to save the life of a few fellow Americans. Well, we got away without a shot being fired, and then we raced across the sands, and we made our escape.
Wendell Phillips would never return to Yemen. Struck down by a series of strokes, he was nursed through the last years of his life by his sister Marilyn.
When he was paralyzed and could hardly move, you know, and then I taught him how to walk again and to use his hand, and he was getting all around. He would sit by the hour and plan the expedition.
In the decades that followed, Yemen closed itself to the outside world. The desert reclaimed the temple.
We never talked about me doing it. He was coming out. You know, he was going to do it. So when he got a second heart attack and suddenly, you know, it was over, there wasn't even any thought about it. You know, it had to be.
Like her brother before her, Marilyn is convinced that evidence for the Queen of Sheba will be discovered here, in the Mahram Bilqis. Modern Yemen remains a dangerous place. For centuries it was closed to outsiders. For decades it was ravaged by civil war. Even today, desert warlords still kidnap foreigners for ransom. But the dangers have failed to discourage Marilyn from her goal. After a quarter of a century of pleading with the Yemeni authorities, she has been allowed to return to the ancient temple.
I believe that a Queen of Sheba must have existed. Why would these stories permeate so many people's lives, especially in the Arabian Peninsula? They believe so strongly in this. And why would it have lasted all these centuries?
Amid heavy security, excavation has begun at the ancient site. The team hope to find evidence that the Queen of Sheba worshipped here. They have just a month. After that, the authorities can no longer guarantee their safety.
Oh, I never saw that, huh? Wow.
Leading Marilyn's archaeological team is Professor Bill Glansman from the University of Calgary, Canada. An expert on the archaeology of Yemen, Bill has elected to excavate previously untouched parts of the site in the hope that they may shed new light on the Sabaeans and their most famous queen.
The sanctuary here, the Mahram Bilqis, is important because we have the ancient Sabaean kingdom centered here at Márib. This is a great historical center in that sense. It's also the largest pre-Islamic sanctuary that we've yet discovered in the Arabian Peninsula. There were always very powerful queens. Some of them would rise up to fame and glory, such as some of the Egyptian queens like Hatshepsut and Cleopatra, for example. But this Queen of Sheba is a little bit different. Without her name, we can't identify her actually as a historical figure. We need to find some link, if there is one, to find the historical reality of that queen and the stories that surround her.
The site covers 60,000 square meters, and every inch must be cleared by hand. Progress is slow, constantly hampered by dust devils that appear and disappear without warning. In Arabic folklore, These desert whirlwinds, sometimes called jinn or genie, have an intimate connection with the legendary Queen of Sheba. For in old Bedouin tales, Sheba was born of such a spirit. According to a fable set in Sheba's ancient capital of Márib, then a grand and prosperous city, there lived among the many merchants a beautiful spirit called Umayya. Umayya fell madly in love with an important advisor to the king, and from their illicit affair, a daughter was born. Half human, half genie, they named the child Bilqis and gave it to the spirits of the desert to raise. As she grew up, Bilqis learned from passing caravans that an evil king had come to rule Márib. One night, she slipped into the king's chamber and plunged a dagger through his heart, saving the people of Sheba and replacing him as their ruler. Two weeks into the dig, and Marilyn's hopes are raised of finding a link between the site and the legend of the Queen of Sheba.
Oh my God. Huh? Ooh. This is really a big structure, isn't it? Solid.
It mentions a king here, a name of a king, and we have here also.
The inscription supports the idea that the temple was a royal building.
We have Damar Ali, king of Saba.
The inscriptions are like billboards. They proclaimed royal edicts and offered devotion to the temple's god.
It's a kind of decree.
Wendell never saw this, or never saw the inside.
But if this really was a royal building, it will surely contain further royal inscriptions. Perhaps even royal graves. Wendell Phillips had been unable to prove the sanctuary was old enough to be associated with the Queen of Sheba. But modern dating techniques have completely overturned traditional assumptions about the site's age.
We do know that the sanctuary goes back at least as early as the time of King Solomon, around 950 to 900 BC, and actually much earlier than that, for over 500, 600 years earlier, according to the archaeological evidence.
During the 10th century BC, when the Queen of Sheba is thought to have lived, the city of Márib was a great commercial center, a stopping point for the merchant caravans that crisscrossed the desert. It was a place to barter goods and exchange stories.
It's a culture that has an immensely rich oral tradition. And still, you go out into the desert, and at Bedouin campfires, you'll be amazed by the stories you will hear.
Traveling across this vast open landscape, merchants were an invaluable source of stories, gossip, and news. And it would not have taken long for word to spread of King Solomon, ruler of Israel. Stories about Solomon had spread far and wide. The construction of his temple had become famous all over Arabia for its grandeur. Renowned for his wisdom and his ability to speak with animals, it was said that Solomon could even command spirits. The Ethiopian holy book, the Kebra Nagast, says that news of this formidable king reached Sheba from a traveling merchant.
It said that a merchant named Tamrin has been to Jerusalem, heard all about the wisdom of Solomon, and naturally he reports all matters of a foreign nature that might impinge on his world to his queen.
She heard of him being a very knowledgeable person, so therefore in her attempt to build a very strong nation, she felt that she needed to go there and then learn from his wisdom, learn from his knowledge, so that